Cool. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome again, everyone, to this month's Singularity discussion series. My name is Cody Hanson. I'm the host, and each month we bring in experts or alumni from the Singularity ecosystem and cover a variety of topics across exponential technologies, innovation, and just exploring the world that we've always discussed is exponential and now is more and more apparent as time goes on in the news, etc. So we're very excited to have Zack Abbott, the CEO and founder of ZBiotics, here today. And this is going to be a really interesting conversation around biotech as well as entrepreneurship in this space. So Zack, I'll pass it over to you to start, just to kind of give a high level kind of overview of who you are, what you do, and a little bit of like kind of how you got to where you're at.
Sure, yeah. So hi, I'm Zach. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ZBiotics, and I guess so. My background, I did a PhD in microbiology, and then was and I worked with bacteria. I was really excited about kind of like all the cool things that bacteria could do, and as I learned more about kind of the way they worked and like kind of all the incredible things like they could just these single cells could sort of sense their whole environment on hundreds of sensors and figuring out like changes in nutrients and heat and pH and all these things and reacting and it's just like a really amazing kind of technology that's been perfected over the last 3 billion years, like rapidly iterating like, kind of every 30 minutes as the bacteria kind of reproduce. So just really incredible um, yeah, technology that nature's provided. And I was really excited about how we could potentially leverage that in some way. And thinking specifically about probiotic bacteria. So the bacteria, safe but edible bacteria that you can eat. Um, Normally you ingest these and they produce thousands of kind of different types of proteins and that perform thousands of different functions. And those are all kind of like optimized for the bacteria. And this idea that we could potentially engineer them to kind of produce an additional enzyme that was beneficial to you in some way. And that was kind of the foundational idea for ZBiotics was that we could take a probiotic bacteria and genetically engineer it to perform some function that benefits you. So when you eat it, it passes through your gut, and as it's passing through, it's doing something useful, and then you pass it out the other side, and you go about your day. And I thought that was just like a really exciting idea. And so that's ultimately what we did at ZBiotics.
So as far as I know, I think ZBiotics is about 9 years old. You started it, I think, in
Yeah.
your living room. You're a PhD microbiologist. What made you make the choice of like instead of going into academia or research, hey, I want to go start a consumer products company?
Yeah, I didn't set out necessarily to do that. I was really passionate, interested in this idea of genetically engineered probiotics, and I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur or anything. But I looked around and I didn't really see a lot of companies doing this, like engineering probiotics. But that was my instinct was like, oh, I'll join a company that's doing this and I'll work on it because it's cool. Um, and I'll say I knew I didn't want to go into academia. I was really excited about the idea of like applying my science to real kind of like real world problems, like problems and solutions was really interesting to me. I originally thought maybe I want to like make drugs and cure diseases. And after my PhD, I went and work for a contract research organization where we design clinical trials for drug companies, big and small, so like small biotechs all the way up to big pharma. And I really enjoyed the experience of doing that, but I also learned a lot about kind of like the process of bringing drugs to market, and saw that, I felt like I could solve problems. I felt like biotech was being utilized like there really well, but there was a huge kind of like white space where people weren't really using biotechnology kind of like for healthy people and kind of like in like health and wellness journey. And I felt like this was like an amazing opportunity. Then there was no reason why biotechnology couldn't be used for all these other things. It was just sort of like that everybody kind of went into the drug industry. And so I just saw a really exciting opportunity kind of apply it in that space. And as I said, I didn't really see anybody else doing that at all. And so I had some friends who kind of nudged me to apply to a startup accelerator with my idea. And I thought, well, why not? I'll give it a shot. And ended up getting into that startup accelerator. And that kind of was like the push I needed to kind of dive in and do a startup in this space. And we're really
Yep.
glad I did.
Why do you think that no one else was doing this? And like, did that make you nervous, to go into this space? There must be a reason, right?
I was I was like a little nervous, but I was more nervous that I just didn't know about like stuff that like a lot of stuff that was happening and that like I thought I had some new idea. But that in reality there was like a ton of stuff going on in that space.
Right.
I wasn't so nervous that I think to some extent it was timing. I think that like the cost of reading and writing DNA has dropped precipitously in the last 15, 20 years. Things that literally cost millions of dollars in 2000 we can do for tens of dollars and like uh a 2 days, like a weekend now. And so I think that like sort of this that really happened really rapidly. And then right when I started this company in 2016, it was like, it had already progressed to the point where I could just sort of like mail order DNA and it would show up at my doorstep a couple of days later. And so I think like the stage was set for startups with creative ideas, right? As opposed to like, and I think previously before that, had to have a lot more capital and a lot more time and things like that to kind of, and so that naturally kind of funneled ideas, I think, into the drug space. So I think I suspected and I think was correct that like timing was good. The number of people with the expertise to do what I was doing was relatively small. And so there was sort of like this kind of like sweet spot. But I also thought, well, I'm sure there's a lot of other people doing this. And it turned out that there really wasn't. And when we launched our first product in 2019, it was the world's first genetically engineered probiotic of any kind to go to market. So we really were the first to kind of do this in kind of the consumer space, and that was cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I think it took you about 3 years to go from inception to product in the market, which included, creating the science, raising money, building out the business model, and then obviously navigating regulation, which is a huge thing. I'm curious about that process of getting kind of into market as a biotech startup, because I think there's a lot of people who may want to start a company or may want to explore biotech more, and it's kind of still seems to be this thing that's a bit of an unknown challenge. Like if you want to go do something in AI, there's a lot of known pathways right now, right? Obviously, the space gets crowded, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity in biotech, and there will be for probably a number of years. But I think it's kind of a bit of a black box. So can you walk through your process of getting things up and running? Like what was the hardest part? What was part of that journey?
Yeah, I think that thinking about that, right? That like from like idea inception in like May of 2016 and then like s- biotechnology product on the market and selling in August of 2019. I mean, that timeline was really short relative to like if I was going to be developing a drug or kind of like other things with biotech. And I think, like I say, the time was right and the time is right and even better now for kind of like developing biotechnology as a new way to develop new solutions. Um, for me, I'll describe my path, which was that I spent the first year just working on the science myself, and so it was just me in a lab, kind of like pipetting and doing the genetic engineering and growing the bacteria, and developing kind of the first bacterial strain that we would use in our first product. And then it took me about a year to build that. And that included inventing sort of like I was trying to build sort of a platform, right? So this
Hmm.
idea that I could take a probiotic bacteria and then engineer it to perform some new function, and then that function could become a product. So the idea that like I could sort of plug and play different functions to make different products. So kind of building that platform and then building the first application of the platform. Um, and that actually went pretty smoothly and it was pretty straightforward and it was what I've been trying to do in my PhD and I had our first project in hand almost exactly a year to the day after I started and then it was about I think really what I saw is all the hard stuff which was um yeah, getting the manufacturing, which I thought was going to be easy. We've been growing bacteria, right, in big vats to like, make probiotics, but then like also other microbes, like, we grow yeast and all these things. And so we have the technology for this. It just turns out that like the infrastructure is still kind of trying to like anticipate and catch up to, I think, like new biotechnology products, especially in the
Hmm.
consumer space. But it's getting better and better. More and more options are kind of popping up. But in 2017, when I was looking around for that, it was really hard to find somebody to work with, especially because we were a startup and we were relatively small scale, and we called up like 160 different contract manufacturers in the space, and for one reason or another, they weren't the right fit. We weren't the right fit, or they weren't the right fit, and so it took a lot of kind of actually at the end of the day, like convincing somebody to do something they didn't normally do, to do it for us, and our first few kind of contract manufacturers were like that. They were kind of like working outside their normal scope. And then we were also focusing on the regulatory process of bringing the product to market, which is relatively straightforward. I mean, in the US, biotechnology, it's really about like kind of like what you built and like what you're claiming and like what it does. And so it's like pretty rational, pretty straightforward. Like we don't have to
Hmm.
like kind of like jump through any like arduous hoops. It depends on the category, but like in the food and supplement space, it's pretty straightforward. But it was, it was a process for sure. And so we had worked on that. We had some regulatory consultants, things that helped us with that. And then I think the other sort of like intimidating piece was like we wanted to build a product that we branded and sold to consumers directly. And so we had to develop a brand and we had to like understand who our customers were going to be. And so we went out and did a lot of sampling with beta, with prototypes, and got people's feedback and heard their objections and their questions and their skepticism, and then sort of crafted a brand and a story and a website that like really addressed those things that we kept hearing come up and stuff. And so my co-founder and I spent you know, really that whole 2 years while we were doing all the other things, we ended up handing out over 10,000 samples directly by hand and like having conversations with people to kind of like develop that brand. So then we kind of did all those things. And there was probably a million other things, but those were like kind of the big buckets that took the most time. And then we were sort of ready to launch in August of 2019 and we launched the product.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of that like founder mentality of, not taking no for an answer with the contractors. And then it's also, I think what you touched on there with the sampling and the research is critical because like I've worked on tech products, startups in the past, and you might hit or miss with product market fit, and then you change some code, but you're doing 3 years of
Right.
develop, work to for one product, and then maybe there's a tiny bit of changing it, but it seems less able to kind of shift quickly than for example, a digital product. And so that research, I think, is to make sure that you have product market fit is a critical piece so that you don't launch and then all the work was for nothing.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And like I think the kind of part I left out of the our first product was like the sort of like 9 or 10 years prior to launching ZBiotics and launching our first product that I had been ideating on this idea in my head. And like I say, I didn't know that it was going to be a startup or it was going to be a product that I built. It was just sort of an idea I had that I liked as a scientist. And I talked to people about it many times. And then when I was sort of like originally pitching the company and things like that to investors and stuff, sort of pitching the different product ideas I had, and then really seeing the moment when they got hooked, and like because I had many different product ideas for this technology to begin with, but then our first product ended up being the thing that I kept repeatedly seeing a lot of interest in. So there was a lot of kind of like customer discovery before the build, which I would, as to your point, I would definitely recommend, right? Is you put the effort and the time in to build something with biotechnology, you want to make sure that it's something people want.
Right.
And so yeah, now the company's established and we're building, products 2, 3, and 4. We pull a lot of that stuff forward. Like, right, like if we were to build a product that did X, would you want it? And so, we're not building things that people don't want. But the actual build part of it sort of depends, but the actual build part doesn't take that long. I mean, yes, it's not writing code, but it's depending if things go really well, I mean, you can do it as fast as 3 to 6 months. And if you hit some roadblocks, which is often the case with biology, it might take you a little bit longer, a year and a half, to kind of get something built and characterized that you understand and things like that. But it is relatively quick. I mean, biology, especially now with all the services and things that you can outsource a lot of these things that you can also get a lot of shots on goal at the same time. You can high throughput things a lot too. So.
Right, which is I think really exciting for the space because, like you said, the infrastructure is getting better to be able to build companies off of. Um, whereas like digital tech has been there for quite a while, and now the biotech space is getting there too. Um, we talked a little bit about in like the promotion of this about what the product is, but can you just go into explaining what your first product is and how it works?
Yeah. So our first product, which we launched in 2019, it's called pre-alcohol. And so it's a probiotic bacteria that has been genetically engineered to express the same type of enzyme your liver uses to break down acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is this toxic byproduct of alcohol metabolism that makes you feel not so great the day after drinking. So the idea is that you take this probiotic bacteria before you drink, and then it gets into your gut, and then as you're drinking and forming acetaldehyde, the probiotic is breaking that down, and basically preventing that from creating a lot of like the systemic inflammation and other things that it causes, so that when you wake up the next day, you feel better than you would have felt otherwise. So it was a really nice kind of first product for the technology. Um, I certainly didn't set out initially to kind of like to for that to be our first product. I had a lot of different ideas, and actually the first time I pitched the idea of a probiotic to kind of help you feel better the day after drinking, it was like a joke. I just sort of like, oh, we could do anything. We could even, make one where you feel good the next day after you've had some beers. And people like got excited. They're like, "Oh, tell me more about that." And I realized that like the more I pitched it and the more I saw that that was the moment people's eyes kind of like lit up, the more I realized it was like, oh, even though it sort of sounded like a silly or maybe frivolous idea to start, it was like, actually, this is a pretty good idea because everybody seemed to understand the problem immediately,
Hmm.
right? And like understand what it was. It was also something that have been around for, the 6,000 years of human history that we've been, intentionally, fermenting and brewing alcohol and drinking it. And yet there's really no real solution to that. That like that solution is like this like old problem with that we've never really had a solution to. So this idea that we could use modern technology to solve it was like, I think, exciting to people and interesting and convincing. And the idea that this product, if it worked when I was considering building it, it's like if this works, then like if people use it, they actually can feel the product working. They can actually feel the benefit themselves. You don't have to like take my word for it. You'll know it's working because you'll wake up and you'll feel better. And I thought for all those reasons, it was like, okay, if I wanted to be the world's first genetically engineered probiotic to go to market, like it should be something that people care about, they understand, and that they could know was working. And so it really felt like it was a good kind of like first idea. And indeed, that's kind of how it's played out, is that like it's a very good hook for people to get interested and excited in what we're doing. And then we get to tell them about the technology, which is something I'm very passionate about, and because they want to know how it works, because why does this work when nothing else does? And yeah, it ended up being a great place for us to start.
Well, yeah, it's like funny, but it's also a great lesson, I think, in I assume that you have these big aspirations of what you want to do in this space and for people's health and wellness and stuff, and you end up starting with a pre-alcohol drink or product. But it's just such a great lesson, and the difference between, I think, what you would ideally want to do as like a researcher or as a scientist or even as a founder versus what the is easiest for the market to understand. And I think a lot of people kind of skip that step. Um, but with that in mind, I know you're working on more products. What can you share about what's coming
Yeah.
down the pipe?
Yeah, and I'll answer this question really quick from Suresh. That it's actually a bacterial version of the human enzyme. So they're functionally identical and 70% identical in terms of sequencing of that, but like bacteria are better at expressing bacterial enzymes. So that made it a little easier. Uh, yeah, yeah, to your point, yes, like this was really meant to be a proof of concept. It's not what like, I'm very passionate about and excited about this idea of building a whole new category of genetically engineered probiotics. As this like
Hmm.
next like generation, like probiotics as they existed before was just sort of like this naturally occurring bacteria, usually a leftover of the food system. Like we know it's safe to eat. Here, eat it, and maybe one of the thousands of functions that it does will tangentially benefit you in some way that we can't really confidently say will reliably happen to everybody or will happen like consistently. But like, hey, try it, and if you like it, then great, then keep taking it. But this idea that we could take this like kind of like hunk of like unrefined iron ore and then like hone it down into like something that actually performs a very specific function,
Hmm.
turn it into a hammer, right? Like or something like that. This idea that we could build something like better and specific using modern biotechnology and like leveraging the power of biology, this 3 billion years of evolutionary history to make this amazing kind of like, bacterial cell and then kind of like guide that to something that we want. That to me was like really exciting. And so the first product is like, yeah, a really great proof of concept and a really great product in its own right. But I feel like there's, basically any biological function on the planet we could put into a probiotic bacteria and create some kind of different benefits. So our second product, which we launched a little over a year ago now, it's called Sugar to Fiber, and so that's a same probiotic bacteria, same like genetic platform, only differs by a single gene from so the first product expresses protein to break down an acetaldehyde. The second one in the same spot on the genome, instead of acetaldehyde, it has a gene that encodes for an enzyme that stacks sugars into fiber in your gut. So fiber is just a long string or a big bush of sugars all stuck together. Um, and there are many enzymes that can basically grab sugars and then kind of build fibers out of them. And so we gave this probiotic bacteria a bacterial enzyme. Actually, this one's actually a native enzyme that the bacteria already makes. We just moved it so that it makes more of it. And so it can grab sugars from your diet, from the foods you're already eating that are floating around in your gut before they get absorbed, and stack them into fibers directly in your gut. And so the idea here is that we can create more fiber naturally from the foods you're already eating. And fiber is sort of one of these things that I think that it's not as sexy as it should be. 95% of Americans don't get enough fiber in their diet, and for all of you out there who are not American and sort of like rolling your eyes about us Americans, the truth is that like across the globe, people don't get enough fiber. In Europe, it's like 85, 90%. So most places in the developed world, we're not getting enough fibers because our diets have changed pretty dramatically in the last like 30, 40, 50 years in terms of the food system and the processing of foods and things like that, and highly refined flours and things like that. You just lose a lot of fiber. And so it takes a lot of concerted effort to make sure you're getting fiber every day. And so this idea that, and we all know that we should be getting fiber, and we should be eating more fruits and vegetables, but we don't necessarily always do it because it's difficult, right? Like it takes
Hmm.
a lot of effort and got to hunt down things. So it's the idea that we could take a probiotic and take the foods we're already eating and convert them and convert some of the sugar from that food into more fiber to feed kind of your microbiome and have a better gut health, which is like lays kind of a foundation for better overall health. And the reason that I built that product as our second product was that I wanted something really different than the first. And people were whenever I told people, oh yeah, it's this probiotic and we engineered it to break down acetaldehyde so you feel better after drinking, they're like, oh, that's so cool. I love that. And it's a probiotic, so it'll be good for my gut, right? And I'm like, well, not really. Like there's no real good hypothesis as to why this probiotic, this or any probiotic would really help your gut. Like it's sort of like I say, tangential at best. And so, but what I saw was that people really, I mean, the probiotics industry is huge and people really
Hmm.
wanted a product for gut health. So if I could build something that I thought as a microbiologist, like actually would help your gut and like your microbiome, which is fiber, like that would be a really great solution, and that's something people wanted. So that's what we built for the second. But then so it's in both cases sort of following the lead of the customer and what they're asking for. And so when we
Hmm.
look at like products 3, 4, and 5, where same thing, we're looking at places like what are the things that people are asking for and that we don't have a good solution for, or that we could use improvement on that biology could really help with. Um, uh, and it's we're looking at things like sleep and athletic performance and longevity and like think about like toxins in our drinking water and in the air and like how we deal with those, and then again like more looking more at kind of like our food system and what are the nutrients that we're devoid of or we're losing kind of as we process foods more, and how can we help with that. And so really just kind of looking all across the spectrum, like what are the problems that modern humans have created for themselves, and like how can we use modern biotechnology to solve them in a way that could not have been solved before we had this opportunity. And I think that it's an exciting space. It's total white space. Like
Right.
until 10 years ago, you couldn't even dream of doing these things, and now they're really really easy and fast and cheap to do. So that's kind of how we're approaching this.
And I mean, I'm a beginner when it comes to the biotech space, but it seems like this is also kind of pre-drug where it's helping your body do things correctly from the beginning versus introducing a fix after the fact, which I think is really exciting as someone who cares about wellness and longevity and just living healthy and happy for as long as possible. I think that's a really exciting concept. That's I think also new to people. I mean, to your point, probiotics have blown up and are this thing. But as like a generic consumer, of whatever Greek yogurt or kimchi, it's like I don't really know. Like I just know it's like I think it's that people say it's good for my gut, so I guess I'll eat some. But like there's not really for me. There's like not a whole lot of rhyme or reason. So having something targeted is really exciting. Um,
Yeah.
and I want to take a quick note here and say that I've seen a few questions in the chat. Mo on our team is here behind the scenes curating those, and so we will go to audience Q&A at the end as well. So if you have questions, as you have them, as many as you want, please drop them in there. We'll get to as many as we can on the back side of this hour here. But as we go through this, Zach, I want to address the GMO piece because I know that that's constantly a thing, especially among people who care about health and wellness. There's feelings about it. But I know you've taken a unique approach, and I want to give you a chance to kind of speak to that and how you address that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that honestly like has played very strongly in our favor in many different ways. So there's this belief in so I'll speak to the I know there's it's sort of like a very international audience here, but I'll speak to the US audience. It's the one that excuse me, the US market. It's the one that we're in and kind of like the research we did the most in. But I do think that like the principles of what of how people in the United States think about GMOs is true kind of for people kind of broadly throughout the world as well. Maybe just kind of to different degrees. So um, the truth there was this belief and it continues to be this sort of belief this like pluralistic ignorance, right? This idea that like I think that everybody else thinks this, but like the reality is not the case, right? There's this belief that everybody is anti-GMO, right? That like everybody in the US is anti-GMO and they don't want GMOs. And so this idea that like we could I even had somebody from like a big company that does microbiology to make products say to me that like, oh yeah, we could have, when I told him what I was doing, he said, yeah, we could have done this, years ago, but we just decided not to because people don't want GMOs. And I was like quietly thinking to myself, like, thank God that he made that assumption because or that company has made that assumption because it has totally left this place wide open for me because it's totally not true. There's this like this weird assumption that like people, first of all, that everybody's anti-GMO, and in reality, if you just go look at like the data, if you look at unbiased surveys, like don't ask like loaded questions about GMOs. If you just ask them kind of people's sort of like neutral beliefs on this, in the U.S., actually, the vast majority of people don't care one way or the other. They don't know very much about it, and it's kind of like you described with probiotics. It's like, oh, I've heard that GMOs are bad, so I guess like I don't know. I guess I avoid them occasionally, but it's very much a conviction loosely held. And the truth is that um, people haven't been given a GMO that they wanted before, right? Like if you're given the opportunity, if you walk into the grocery store, right, and you see like that there's like GMO corn and not GMO corn, right? Like what is the benefit to you to buying the GMO corn? There is no
Right.
benefit, right? They're identical to you, except for the fact that you've maybe heard that GMOs are bad. So you're like, okay, well, I guess I don't want the GMO corn. I'll take the non-GMO. Of course you will, right? The benefit of that genetic engineering was for the seed producer, the farmer, whatever, like, upstream of you. And so like, yeah, then there's these like concerns and things like that, right? So then why would you ever choose one, right? And so you ask people, do you like GMOs? And they think of Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soy. And they're like, well, no, I don't want those. And I'm like, okay, fine. But like this idea that they'll reject all GMOs no matter what, even when one is genetically engineered to give you a benefit you do want, is crazy. That's not how people operate, right? At all, right? Like you see people even if they believed that GMOs are bad for them, which I can confidently say as a microbiologist that the fact that it's genetically engineered has nothing to do with its safety profile. I mean, what it's genetically engineered to do, like definitely does, but the fact that we engineered it in and of itself does not inherently make it unsafe. But even if you believe that that were true, if it did something you wanted, like we have lots and lots and lots of evidence to say that people would buy it anyway, even if they thought it was bad for them. Like people buy cigarettes, they buy Coca-Cola, they buy McDonald's. Like these are things that they know definitively are bad for them, but they have a benefit that they want, and so they buy it
Mhm.
anyway, right? And so this idea that we could use. So I was glad to hear. I wasn't glad to hear. I mean, honestly, I was actually frustrated to hear that like people were sort of being. Being a little cheeky here. I mean, I'm very. I started ZBiotics because I'm very passionate about the promise of biotechnology and genetic engineering. And I was very frustrated with how the industry was treating GMOs, right? Like there were these brands out there and they were marking their products as non-GMO when they had no business even entering the conversation. I literally found non-GMO water and non-GMO salt, like things that don't have genetic information that could ever have been engineered. And they're just like, so all that is sort of like throwing this technology under the bus, even though they have no idea what it is or how it can be used. And I saw this as like as a very dangerous precedent, that kind of a conversation or narrative that fanning the flames of fear on a technology that humanity needs. We need this as a way to solve kind of like the existential crises that are facing humanity. And so um but it was not surprising to me that based on that and like kind of like years of precedent around this sort of like non-GMO movement, that like CPG companies were sort of like shying away from using genetic engineering. And in fact, in many cases, sort of like bending over backwards to do other wacky, weird things just to avoid having a GMO in their product, right? When they could make a far better product if they'd use genetic engineering that was better, safer, more effective, like more desirable, better benefits. And so I kind of set out to prove everybody wrong. Like that was like, hey, look, we can make a product. And if you make a product that's a really great product, that creates a benefit that you can't get anywhere else. And you're transparent with people about the fact that it's genetically engineered. And the reason that that benefit exists is because of the genetic engineering. So, like, the genetic engineering is done for the end user, that, like, that people will accept it and you will move the conversation forward. And that's exactly what we've done. So first and foremost, I'd say we benefit from this fear because it sort of created this open space for us. But in reality, that was the problem that we were really trying to solve. But secondly, it was also like a huge differentiator, right? In a world of where you walk in the grocery store and you see the non-GMO butterfly everywhere, our product, we put on every bottle and box of ZBiotics, we say proudly GMO. We don't shy away from it at all. We advertise it. We had Facebook ads in the early days and Instagram ads that said like that have a picture of a bottle with the proudly GMO like blown up and said like, this is the technology we use to make this product. And we saw there was a huge amount of engagement with those ads. They were very effective. People like basically it was like I say that the vast majority of people didn't really have a strong conviction or really a lot of understanding. And they were like, well, why are you saying something that's different than everybody else? Like, why are you proud about the fact that your product's a GMO and not like ashamed of it or hiding it, And I thought it was bad. And so then they would click in and they'd read about our website and they say, like, oh, you took a probiotic bacteria and then you gave it an enzyme from another bacteria to break down this toxin that like when that will make me feel bad after I drink. It's like I want that benefit, and that doesn't sound scary. Like and so it's sort of like it was like a layup, right? And it was so validating. Like I was very confident in talking to a lot of people and doing a lot of surveys and focus groups around genetic engineering and people's opinions and perceptions around GMOs. And I was very confident that we would be successful with this. But you don't know for sure until you do it. And it was very satisfying to see that indeed, so to date, we sold 10 million bottles of pre-alcohol since we launched it. And 10 million bottles means, with every bottle clearly labeled proudly GMO. And if you go to our website, you'll see GMO and genetic engineering everywhere. We don't hide it at all. And that means 10 million times that somebody knowingly chose a GMO. It has not at all been a barrier. We get very little to no pushback on the fact that the product is genetically engineered. We get a lot more customers writing in that they're frustrated that we use natural flavors, which is sort of like a new bugaboo in like the wellness and food industry right now and stuff. And it's funny to me because it's like this is like such a like non thing, but it's way more fear around that right now, like than around the GMO issue,
Yeah.
and it's because we're transparent about it, and we say like that's why the product works, and people are like, okay,
Right. Right. So you're, 2019 to now, you're still, I think, essentially the only ones doing this. What do you like? How do you read that? Is that people still just are afraid of getting into GMOs from the big corporates, or is it like, I don't know. What's
yeah.
your take on that?
I do. I think that like all the big corporates that can do it are still like 10 million sounds like bottles sounds like a lot to us, but right like we have not sufficiently de-risked it for the big players to really believe me that if you're honest and transparent and responsible, and you use the technology well, and you disclose that to consumers and you build products they want, that'll be fine. So they're interested. We get a lot of calls and we get a lot of people come up to me at conferences and stuff, and they're watching what we're doing, but I don't think we haven't gotten far enough yet for to de-risk it for them. And then for the startups, it's like you actually see a lot. There's actually a lot of startups that are building in the space. What I found consistently to be the challenge has been that, and it's painted with a relatively broad brush, but I think that we're not seeing more entrance to specifically what we're doing because I think that there still is this. It's two things. I think there's still a belief that it will be harder with a GMO. And so there are lots of startups that are still trying to use genetic engineering, but again, like kind of like bending over backwards to like have it technically not be GMO. Like they'll purify out like the bacteria that they use to engineer to make the ingredient and just provide the ingredient. So then technically it's not the O is organism, GMO is genetically modified organism. And so technically it's not an organism in there. There's only a product of an organism. And so they like technically can
Mm,
claim it's not GMO. So there are a lot of people that are doing things like that still. Like they still are afraid that like consumers are going to reject this. And part of that is because like the scientists who can build these things are don't are afraid to build consumer brands, don't want to engage with consumers, don't want to engage with like people. They think that that's like that like there's this very like this like separation between like science and like consumer. And I think that's one of the unique things about ZBiotics is that we're a biotechnology company that invents new ingredients. And there's a lot of companies that do that, right? But then we're also a CPG company that takes those ingredients we invented and we build novel products that we brand and sell directly to the consumer. And I think, each of those things, those functions exists in large numbers, but to have one that does both is relatively rare. And so I think that I think that's in part because like the scientists who build these things don't want to be the people who try to market it to consumers. And so there are companies working on this and following our lead, and they call me up and ask how we did it and kind of like all that kind of stuff. And I'm always like forthcoming because I'm excited about the category and always trying to be helpful. But yeah, I think that it's developing slowly because I think there's still just a lot of trepidation around like, are people going to accept this and stuff? And so, we'll just keep trying to succeed and prove to them that it hasn't been a problem and it won't be. And people are just going to get more and more excited about things that work, and companies that are being honest with them. I mean, that's the thing is we earn a lot of trust with consumers, right? When we say like, hey, this product is a GMO, and we're not trying to hide that. And people are like, okay, like I believe that you'll tell me then. And they're also interested like if you're afraid of a GMO, that means you believe it does something, right? And so like it also is it's like a validating part of the technology. Like, well, I mean, that probably works because like if you're
yeah.
genetically and so it's been like an asset far more than it's been a liability. And I try to convince kind of brands that. And I think that people are seeing that. And I think that, this trend here in the consumer space where people want honesty and transparency, it's a great opportunity.
To your point of it is very rare to have a company that essentially does both, of building and marketing a consumer product or even a B2B product, and then someone who's doing actual research. For people who are maybe they're young entrepreneurs, maybe they have a experience in the corporate world and they want to switch to entrepreneurship, or maybe they're working at a corporate and they're in charge of some sort of innovation and are curious about the space. Do you have any tips or recommendations for finding researchers and kind of getting them on board to help with the technical side, or vice versa, a scientist who is curious about this stuff but doesn't necessarily want to go do like I think there's a lot of partnership opportunity there, and I think it seems like it's not taken advantage of enough of bringing those two groups together, business and research. Um, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a kind of a tricky problem. I mean, the truth is that like it's a great time to hire a scientist. I think that like there's, at least, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's a lot of turnover and a lot of kind of like I think it's a hiring market right now, I think,
Hmm.
in the science world. And so I think if you have a cool idea and a cool, juicy scientific problem, it's a good way to attract a scientist, right? A scientist wants to kind of go and solve those problems. but yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, that the question is like, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and what's your strategy for solving it, and like, what kind of scientists do you need? And so I think developing your kind of like biostrategy is really important. Understanding what you want, and you don't have to be a biologist to do that. I think like you say, look, I want to make a pet food that's more sustainable, like that doesn't, support like whatever factory farming industry, right? And using byproducts of and propping up kind of using byproducts of animals and propping up farming industry. Then like, okay, how do I approach that? Like, what do animals need in their food? And like you can just kind of like Google that, right? And like, and then kind of like figure out like, okay, what are the things you need to replace, and like what are the maybe biotechnologies that you could use to kind of like develop those nutrients and this is not a totally hypothetical story. I'm describing a company where a non-science marketer saw this like opportunity and started a company and then use biotechnology to make protein for pet food. And so I think that like that's really the idea, right? You figure out what your problem is and you figure out what you solve. And then I think but like think of biology as like another, it's a tool in the tool belt, right? And a new one, a really exciting one that's really powerful that people haven't been using. And so it's like this it's a new thing you can adopt, right? And you don't have to be able to do it yourself. You don't have to be a scientist to know how to do it. You just need to know what you want built. And now you can in-house that, right? You can bring scientists in, like say, okay, like, look, this is what we're going to try and do. Or like now there's so many more kind of like services. I think a lot of those scientists who didn't want to build brands like we did, they set up companies that are meant to be sort of like selling like the picks and shovels, right? Like a lot of the sort of
Right.
synthetic biology service companies out there where you can go to them and say like, hey, we want a bacteria that can do this. Can you build it? And they'll be like, yeah, we'll build 1,000 of them and we'll iterate and we'll improve them until we find the one that does exactly what you want. And it could just make an ingredient that you can put into your product, or it can make an ingredient that you make into put into a material, right? Like, a classic example of this is like those, like basically laundry detergent, those Tide Pods and things like that. They're full of these enzymes that are made by engineered microbes. Those enzymes can work in like cold temperatures and to break up stains and dirt and things like that and chew away frayed fabric so you can get like a smoother fabric so you don't get like you don't get like frayed clothing and stuff like that. And all that's done with biotechnology. But like you don't know or see any of that in the final product, right? You just use the bacteria like in a bioreactor to grow the enzymes that you take out and then you put into your product. And so there's a lot of these like so you find the problem to solve, and then now we used to always just go to like chemistry to solve those problems, and now we can say like, okay, well, like biology actually has like really great solutions too to some problems that chemistry can't solve or not solve very well, or that they solve in a way that's really damaging or expensive or whatever. And so just thinking of this as like as a resource, I think is a huge right now it's a huge competitive advantage because it's like really on a relative basis, so few people are working with
Yeah.
biology to solve these problems.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of increasing modularity in this world like that. There's the AWSs of biotech are coming
Yes.
online.
Absolutely. Yeah, tons, right? Like there's dozens of companies now that will do strain design, like to build the bacteria to make the enzyme, like so all the genetics. They'll do like enzyme optimization. So you start with like a native enzyme and then you can change it so that it works better and faster and more efficiently. And downstream processing design. So like you can like get better extraction of whatever product you're looking for. I mean, this is all like you could literally one person in their living room could set all this up theoretically, if like with enough research and things like that, that
Right.
you wouldn't have to do anything yourself.
Amazing. Let's get into some audience questions. We have a few coming in. The first one that I saw from Cecilia, how can you share how you approached the adoption of your product? So I assume this is really related to like marketing and kind of taking up market share. What were some of those approaches?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so how can you share how you approached adoption of your product? So I assume this is kind of related to basically marketing and market share growth. What are some of the approaches you took?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we were trying the big hurdles we saw with our product specifically, and so when I was talking about the 10,000 samples that me and my co-founder handed out, we saw that like kind of like there were the very reliably we got like sort of like two big objections. The first objection was like that won't work because everybody was just very skeptical of the category. There was a ton of snake oil. Nothing had worked in the past, and so now whenever anything comes out in this space, people are like, oh, it's junk. It's not going to work. And so we had to convince them, okay, first and foremost, it would, and that's where we leaned into genetic engineering, and say like, look, I hear you, but this is not just like vitamins and like electrolytes put into a bottle, like branded. Like I know there's 1,000 of those and they don't work for you. This is totally different. It's the world's first ever genetically engineered probiotic. It is engineered to break down this, so we explain the science of it, and they'd be like, okay, I believe you. This sounds different. Sounds like it could work.
Yeah.
But then they'd have this sort of second objection, like, but I don't need it. And then so we'd have to like address why, like in the U.S., there's sort of like this guilt around drinking, and this idea that if you feel bad the next day, that like you sort of deserve it, or that like it's a irresponsible behavior. So we had to like sort of like kind of like anyway. So we learned that, we heard that over and over and over again, and so then we built our whole brand around addressing that. And we learned that, like for instance, like long form science explainers, which are not supposed, it's like totally a no-no in marketing, were really effective for us. And so how to throw out the playbook a little bit, and I think
Hmm.
that that's important when you're building something new. But like customer education is important, and then we looked for channels where we could do that. And so like you know we did a lot of acquisition on Facebook and things like that, and like everybody does in the early days, and still do, right? But like usually we learned like we had to like get something exciting and provocative, like proudly GMO, to get people to click through and then actually read, kind of get to our website, and then like we have landing pages and things like that where we tailor that. Or one of the, I mean, right now one of our best ways of getting new customers is podcasts. Podcasts are like podcast advertising has been really powerful because you have like the host, and they're able to give you a little bit more content, right? Than
Hmm.
than the 3 seconds you have on like social media. They can explain the product a little bit better. They give a authentic endorsement, and in one fell swoop, they're kind of like dealing with our two kind of major objections right out of the gate. So
Right.
really tailoring our strategy to kind of the all the customer discovery we did to learn what the major objections were.
We have a kind of a clarifying question here from Laura around probiotics. I think you might have mentioned that they don't have a proven effect, but that there are a variety of strains that have clinical trials supporting their effects. Do you
Yeah.
have a clarification on that?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that so the best you can say. So if you look, okay, I'll start by saying that there is no probiotic that has been approved by the FDA for any as a to cure or treat any disease. And so there are, if you go and you look on like PubMed, and look for you'll find thousands of papers talking about like effects that probiotics have. And then what you'll see is that like those probiotic, the same exact strain probiotic done in a different study will have a different effect and a different change. And it's not to say that they aren't real, but like it is to say that it is highly variable and highly unpredictable. Like everybody's microbiome is totally different. You have this community of literally like 10 times as many or 100 times as many genes, bacterial genes, as you do human genes in your whole body, in your colon. And so this is very complex community, and yours is totally different than mine, and yours today is totally different than it will be in like say 2 years. And so this idea that like that one strain with its little cohort of genes will get into everybody's gut, no matter how different they all are, and uniformly have the same impact is not supported by any evidence that we've ever seen. Like at best, you'll see like 20 to 40-person study where they see a statistically significant difference, but then that's not reproduced in another study in a different cohort of people, and that's what you'd expect. So I think like to summarize, like you can say that it's not to say that probiotics do nothing. It's to say that it's inconsistent or variable from person to person. That like some probiotics can help some people sometimes, and I think that that's very much true. And so if you experiment with probiotics and you see like you can see real biological effects, you can see like reductions in inflammation or better like regularity or like or whatever it might be. That absolutely is real, and that's really happening for you. But that doesn't mean that necessarily it's going to work for somebody else. Um, and that's exactly the experience we see is that like there's no silver bullets because I mean the microbiome is so diverse and so different. And so it's not to say that probiotics don't do anything. It's just it's very hard to get some sort of like reliable effect.
Hmm.
Which is where like with our product, right? It's like it's less, what we're trying to do is create that reliability or that consistency, right? Like, so regardless of of everybody's microbiome is totally different. But regardless of that difference, right? Like we sort of like overlay like we engineered the bacteria to ensure that it's expressing this one enzyme no matter what the conditions of your gut are. Like, so it's constitutively expressing this enzyme. And so really what we're doing is an enzyme delivery system. It's like the probiotic is
Hmm.
really just a chassis for this like function that we're delivering. And so it's like an overlay over whatever's happening in your microbiome. And so that was our approach, right? We sort of sidestepped that complexity by kind of like using kind of modern biotechnology.
Interesting. That definitely helps me understand it better for sure. How difficult has it been to navigate distribution in Europe due to that GMO label?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, extremely. We're not in Europe. We're
Okay.
only in the U.S. right now because, yeah, exactly. Regulations around the world, each country has their own, and some are more strict than others. Europe is probably the least friendly. There's a path forward, and that is also changing. New administrations in various EU countries are starting to kind of recognize that they're sort of like hampering innovation by kind of having these blanket, right? Like the problem here is, right, that GMO, we shouldn't like saying a GMO is good or like regulating things just because they're genetically engineered as a whole is really nonsensical, right? Because like fundamentally genetic engineering is a technology and it's used to make products. And those products can be bad or
Hmm.
good, right? But like that it's just a technology. And so like and to say that like just because we've used this technology, it is now banned is really, it's not scientific and it's not rational. It's more reactionary to dislike or fear around the GMOs that have been currently available, right? And so sort of like we said a ban on all GMO, like Europe said a ban on all GMOs because at the time they said all GMOs, there were only a handful and they didn't like any of them, right? And so it was
Right.
like that was like accurate, right? But then as we've advanced the technology a lot and kind of the things, the applications we're doing with it, I think that like the world is slowly realizing that like not all GMOs are the same, and
Right.
so hopefully those open up. We're working on it, but yeah, it's been a real challenge.
So when you were iterating on the pre-alcohol product, was there anything that didn't work in the product initially and had to be revised to increase effectiveness?
With the first product, the luckily, I'll say that like the bacterial strain, the probiotic bacteria that we engineered was really good at breaking down acetaldehyde. Like, and I built several in parallel, and I picked the best one, and the best one is it's still the one that's in the product today. But what we saw was that like in formulating the product around the bacteria, um, we started to think about like we have to make something that has food safety, like stable. Like I really want to make something shelf stable at room temperature, and like so we had to use like acid and heat, and like bacteria obviously don't like acid and heat, and so we did have a lot of iterations of formulation and just and literally the manufacturing and bottling process
Mm.
to make sure that we retained the function and efficacy of the bacteria despite kind of like all those like other factors of like that you start introducing with sort of like food safety.
Related to that, how do you measure the effectiveness in consumers beyond just like the testing phase?
Yeah, I mean, so it's tricky because like we're not a drug, and indeed it can be difficult, right? Like in the U.S., for instance, if we were to do like a clinical trial where we measured things that were like specific disease related symptoms, like nausea and headache and things like that, that like fundamentally if we measure those things and we publish those things, then like the FDA would say like, well, then you're trying to be a drug, and like
Right.
and so then so it's like kind of the irony of like the supplement and food industry is that like if you prove that it works, then you can no longer market it as that. You have to like now be, and so internally we did a lot of testing to validate like look, we were trying to launch the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. We knew that that was going to be challenging. If it didn't work, then why like we could sweep vitamins
Right.
into a bottle just like everybody else. It'd be a lot easier. So the whole point here was that it needed to work. So we needed to convince ourselves before we launched that it was actually working. And so internally, I used to design clinical trials for drug companies, as I mentioned before. And so we did a lot of testing in people, kind of comparing A/B testing when they didn't have the product versus when they did, and then asking them how they felt the next day. And self-reported pain. That's kind of like the only way that you can really know. And so that's a very tricky study design, but we designed like a pretty rigorous studies and things like that internally for us to know the product, but we can't publish those. But we
Right.
got a lot of conviction from that. And then
Right.
when we got on the market, it's like, okay, what can we do? And so then honestly, people are often very convinced by like testimonials and anecdote, which we know is not very scientific, but like that is what like people actually care about more even than your clinical data, like in digging into that. The average, your average consumer. And then, the other things we watch, like obviously like batch to batch, like do we see the same? We collect rigorous data on like inbound, and we also do outbound like solicitation of like satisfaction and things like that. And we see it from like batch to batch. Is there any differences in like the percentage of people who are reporting that it doesn't work for them, or that, or giving us like a low star rating, or responding to one of our CSAT questionnaires differently. And we see is
Yeah.
that like very reliably, it's about 95% of customers say they feel better, or they like the product, or a high CSAT. So that's a really high percentage. In the supplement industry, it's like you never get that usually, and so that's been really valuable and validating for us, and so that kind of helps us track to say that like the product, even as we sort of make iterative changes and things like that, that we're retaining kind of the same efficacy.
Great. We have just a few minutes left, but I'm going to try to get through the remaining questions here. For someone who has started using sugar to fiber, can they stop anytime or does it have to be continued? And when is the best time to take it and for how long?
Yeah, for sugar to fiber, it's so the idea is you would take it daily around the same time every day. The bacteria that we use, Bacillus subtilis, it's a bacteria that you eat every day of your life already. It's in like fresh fruits and vegetables all over the ground, the soil in your kitchen, and it's naturally evolved to pass through stomach acid unharmed, and then sort of like wake up. It's in this dormant state, like wakes up in the gut, flows down the gut, and then you pass it out the next day. And so basically with your next bowel movement. And so you would essentially, in an ideal world, you're sort of taking it every day because it's a transient bacteria. And it doesn't really matter when you take it as long as it's sort of the same time. If you stop taking it, the bacteria will go away. It's very, very hard to reliably get bacteria to seed your gut for the reasons I talked about earlier about how everybody's microbiome is totally different. Getting a bacteria to join your microbiome is very variable. And so we actually, again, we sidestep that problem. We said like that is something that is unnecessary and too challenging, and nobody's really reliably done that. So instead, we're going to use something that we know is sort of transient and has like a single one day effect.
Awesome. And then this last question here, I think is a great way to wrap up. How much does it roughly cost to develop a product like pre-alcohol at each stage? I've worked in biochemical products before. I know it's never easy. Also, what drives or supports you to pursue this?
Yeah, it's not trying to hand wave away this answer. It's like it's going to be very dependent on what you're trying to build and how complicated it is. For us, this is a from a biology perspective, a pretty simple build. Like it was a single gene going into a single location, and so like microbiology itself is pretty cheap, right? And if you're not doing like some big high throughput thing or something, then like you can do it for like on the order of like thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, like very little to kind of actually literally do the build. And then if you're outsourcing it to, a Ginkgo Bioworks or one of these other, then you're going to pay your service fee for that. And now we're talking probably tens to maybe hundreds, depending again on how challenging the build is or what you're asking it to do.
Hmm.
And then so that's the development, and then once you're there, like you know, growing in a bioreactor is pretty cheap, right? Like making you can tell by the cost of probiotics as ingredients, right? That the pennies a dose. It's like especially as you scale up, that gets like very very affordable. And then kind of from there on out, it's like the same as any CPG, right? Like you have your ingredients and all that kind of stuff, and so I guess like the regulatory is kind of the other somewhat unique piece, but not particularly expensive. I mean, like uh, uh, door to door, like from start to kind of like to grass. If you're taking a food, it's like for us, it's like somewhere in the around in the like low hundreds of thousands of dollars, like 200,000 $200,000.
Amazing. And I assume getting cheaper and more approachable by the year.
Yes, always. Like, yeah, it's getting more efficient, more approachable, simpler. And so, like, I mean, as far as talking about like trying to build a totally new product using modern technology, I think it's probably like it's incredibly approachable and affordable already.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, amazing. Zach, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you. How can people follow along with you in the ZBiotic journey?
Yeah, I mean, our website is the best thing.
All right,
And Instagram, I guess. Yeah, yeah, are probably the things we're most active on. So yeah, check us out.
cool.
Ziotics.com.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate the time. I will send a follow-up email within the next couple of days with a recording, a transcript. You can share this out, and any mentioned resources. So thanks again for your time. Really appreciate everyone being here. Thanks, Zach, and we'll catch you at an
Yeah,
upcoming executive program soon here.
definitely. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks all.